The alarm clock's red digits glared 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before the scheduled wake-up, but Darius Washington was already awake. Sleep had become a luxury he couldn't quite afford anymore, not with the spreadsheet of bills that lived rent-free in his mind, updating itself with compound interest every time he closed his eyes. The apartment was still dark quiet except for the rhythmic breathing coming from the smaller bedroom down the hall, where Maya dreamed whatever six-year-olds dreamed about unicorns probably, or whether chocolate milk tasted better than strawberry. He swung his legs out of bed, feet finding the worn carpet by muscle memory, and padded to the bathroom. The mirror showed a 34-year-old man who looked older on hard days younger, when Maya made him laugh. Dark skin, close-cropped hair going gray at the temples faster than he'd like to admit, eyes that carried the weight of being both mother and father for 3 years running. The fluorescent light buzz flickered, settled into its familiar hum. Another thing to fix. The list never got shorter. The shower ran cold for the first 30 seconds, a quirk of the building's ancient plumbing, but he'd learned to expect it, even welcome it. The shock cleared his head, washed away the fragments of interrupted sleep. Today was Friday, which meant the weekly financial review meeting at Bennett Industries, which meant facing Victoria in her razor-sharp questions about quarterly projections that weren't projecting the way anyone wanted them to. He scrubbed shampoo through his hair, tried not to calculate how many more bottles he could afford this month after the latest batch of medical bills from his mother's oncologist. The kitchen was crammed, but functional counters crowded with evidence of single parenthood. Maya's artwork held to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like letters, a half-finished puzzle on the small dining table, a stack of library books about princesses and dragons that were due back Wednesday. Darius measured coffee grounds with practiced precision, pressed the button on the ancient coffee maker that wheezed to life like an asthmatic dragon. While it brewed, he pulled ingredients from the refrigerator, eggs, milk, bread, butter, and started breakfast. Scrambled eggs lightly salted, the way Maya liked them. Toast with just enough butter to make it interesting, but not so much that she'd complain about grease. Orange juice in the plastic cup with the princess on it, the one she'd picked out herself at Target 3 months ago, with such conviction that he couldn't say no despite its $5 price tag. He plated everything, set it on the table, then walked down the hallway to wake his daughter. Maya's room was an explosion of color in an otherwise beige apartment. Pink walls painted during a weekend he'd spent with a YouTube tutorial, and more determination than skill, covered in posters of animated characters and a growth chart marking her progress from infant to first grader. She slept curled around a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hopscotch, her natural hair spread across the pillow in a halo of coils that would need attention before school. Darius sat on the edge of her bed, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Maya's eyes opened slowly, focused on him with that moment of confusion that always preceded recognition. Her voice came out scratchy with sleep. "Is it morning already?" He smiled, the kind that came easier around her than anywhere else in his life. "It's morning, baby girl. Time to get up. I made your favorite." She stretched the movement, all limbs and theatrical yawning. "Scrambled eggs." The certainty in her voice made him laugh softly. Scrambled eggs. She bounded out of bed with the energy that only children possessed, racing past him toward the kitchen. He followed at a more measured pace, listening to the sound of her settling into her chair, the scrape of fork against plate. By the time he joined her, she was already eating, swinging her legs under the table in a rhythm only she could hear. Between bites, she looked up at him with those eyes that were her mother's legacy, dark and perceptive. "Daddy, is today a stress day?" The question caught him off guard, though it shouldn't have. Maya had a radar for his moods, could read the tension in his shoulders like other kids read picture books. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" She shrugged, matter of fact. "You have your stress face, the one where your eyebrows do the thing." He forced his expression to relax, reached across to ruffle her hair. "Just work stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." Her fork paused midway to her mouth. "Is it because of the mean lady boss?" His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. They had had this conversation before about not calling people mean, about understanding that adults had complicated lives and jobs that made them seem harsh sometimes. But Maya had met Victoria exactly once during a company family day 6 months ago, and had declared her mean within 5 minutes of watching her correct someone's presentation with surgical precision. He set his cup down carefully. "Miss Bennett isn't mean, Maya. She's just very serious about her work." Maya's expression suggested she remained unconvinced, but was willing to table the discussion. Okay, but she made you have your stress face that day too. There was no arguing with six-year-old logic, so he didn't try. Instead, he finished his coffee, cleared the plates, and started the complicated process of getting a first grader ready for school. Hair was the biggest challenge her natural coils required, patience care and products he'd learned about through frantic Google searches and advice from the mothers at Maya's school who'd taken pity on him. He sectioned her hair into 4 parts, applied leave-in conditioner, worked through each section with the wide-toothed comb his own mother had shipped to him with detailed instructions written in her careful handwriting. Maya sat still mostly, though she kept up a running commentary about the upcoming school day, about her friend Jessica's birthday party tomorrow, about the new book her teacher was reading to the class. Darius let her words wash over him, focused on the familiar rhythm of the task. When he finished, he'd managed 2 neat puffs secured with colorful elastics, good enough that Maya examined herself in the mirror with approval. The drive to Maya's school took 20 minutes through morning traffic past neighborhoods that shifted from working class to professional with each mile marker. Maya's charter school occupied a converted historic building in a district that was slowly gentrifying, accepting students on a lottery basis that had felt like divine intervention when her number came up. The tuition was scaled based on income, but even the scaled version stretched his budget in ways that kept him awake some nights, doing calculations that never quite added up to comfort. He walked her to the entrance, backpack slung over her small shoulders, lunchbox clutched in one hand. Other parents milled around, mostly mothers who smiled politely but kept their distance. A single father remained an oddity in this particular ecosystem. Maya turned before entering, grabbed him around the waist in a hug that threatened to crack something open in his chest. Her voice was muffled against his shirt. "Love you, Daddy." He bent down, kissed the top of her head. "Love you too, baby girl. Have a great day." She released him, skipped through the doors with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved, and disappeared into the stream of other students. Darius waited until he couldn't see her anymore, then walked back to his car, already mentally shifting gears from father to financial manager. The drive to Bennett Industries took another 40 minutes, traffic thickening as he approached the glass and steel tower in the city's business district. The building was impressive in that soulless corporate way, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces that made you feel small before you even walked through the doors. Darius had worked here for 3 years, long enough to know which elevators ran faster, which bathrooms were cleanest, which conference rooms had the best lighting for the marathon meetings that defined his professional existence. He parked in the underground garage, took the elevator to the 15th floor, where the finance department sprawled across an open floor plan designed by someone who'd never actually had to work in one. His cubicle sat near the window, a minor perk that came with his manager title. The computer booted up while he grabbed coffee from the break room, nodded at colleagues who were already deep into their morning routines. Sarah Miller, his assistant, and the closest thing he had to a work friend, appeared at his cubicle entrance before he'd taken his first sip. She was 26, fresh from a prestigious MBA program, sharp enough to run circles around most of the senior staff, but trapped in an assistant role because she'd made the mistake of being both young and female in a company that valued neither. Her expression telegraphed urgency. "Morning meeting got moved up to 8:30. Victoria's already in the conference room, and she looks like she wants blood." Darius checked his watch, 8:15. "What happened?" Sarah lowered her voice, though the open floor plan made privacy largely theoretical. "Preliminary quarterly numbers came in last night. We're down 15% from projections. Hamilton's been in her office since 7. Charles Hamilton, board chairman, old money, the kind of man who wore his entitlement like a second skin. If he'd been closeted with Victoria for over an hour, nothing good would come from this meeting." Darius grabbed his laptop, the physical folder containing his department's reports, and followed Sarah toward the conference room. The executive floor occupied the building's top story, accessible only by a separate elevator that required keycard access. The conference room was all floor-to-ceiling windows, and a table that could seat 20, but somehow always felt too small when Victoria Bennett was in the room. She stood at the head, tablet in hand, her attention fixed on something that made her jaw tighten, in a way that Darius had learned to recognize as fury being forcibly restrained. Victoria Bennett was 42, but could pass for younger on days when stress hadn't carved its temporary marks into her features. Today was not one of those days. Her suit was impeccable, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind that cost more than Darius's monthly rent. But her eyes held that particular hardness that meant someone was about to get eviscerated with surgical precision. Dark hair pulled back in a style that was professional and severe skin pale enough that the stress showed in the tightness around her mouth. She was objectively beautiful in that intimidating way that made men uncomfortable and women wary. The other department heads filed in, settling into chairs with the nervous energy of people expecting an execution. Hamilton sat to Victoria's right, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression one of barely concealed satisfaction. At 63, he'd spent his entire career climbing corporate ladders and pushing competitors off them. The quarterly shortfall was exactly the kind of ammunition he'd been waiting for. Victoria's voice cut through the settling murmur. "Let's begin. Charles, if you'd present the preliminary numbers." Hamilton opened his folder with theatrical precision, distributed copies around the table. The numbers were worse than Sarah had indicated, not 15% down, but 18. Revenue had contracted, expenses had ballooned, and the stock price was going to react Monday morning with the kind of volatility that made boards nervous and shareholders litigious. Hamilton's tone carried just enough concern to mask the satisfaction underneath. "As you can see, we're facing significant headwinds. The question we need to address is whether this represents market conditions or management decisions." It was a subtle knife, but everyone in the room felt it slide in. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around her, a tightening that made Darius's shoulders tense in sympathetic response. Her reply came measured, controlled. "Market conditions are certainly a factor. Tech sector valuations across the board are down 12%. However, I take full responsibility for our performance. The question is what adjustments we make moving forward." Hamilton leaned back, folded his hands. "Perhaps the adjustment needed is at the strategic level. Your initiatives over the past 2 years, diversity hiring, expanded parental, leave the employee wellness program, they've been admirable from a social perspective, but questionable from a fiduciary standpoint." There it was, the real agenda. Hamilton had opposed every progressive policy Victoria had implemented, citing cost concerns and shareholder value. The quarterly shortfall gave him the opening he needed to push back, to reframe compassion as financial irresponsibility. The head of marketing, Jennifer Torres, shifted uncomfortably. "The wellness program has improved retention by 23%. That's significant cost savings in recruitment and training." Hamilton smiled without warmth. "Retention doesn't matter if we can't afford to retain them." Darius felt his jaw clench. The numbers Hamilton was using were selectively chosen, ignoring the longer-term projections that showed Victoria's policies would pay dividends over time. But corporate boards didn't think in years. They thought in quarters and stock prices, in the immediate gratification of shareholders who measured success in dividend checks. Victoria's attention shifted to Darius. "What's your assessment of the finance department's role in this shortfall?" The question was direct, professional, but Darius caught something else underneath, a challenge maybe, or a test. He opened his laptop, pulled up the detailed breakdown he'd prepared. His voice came steadier than he felt. "Our department's forecasting models were accurate within 2%. The variance comes primarily from three sources: unexpected supply chain costs, in manufacturing higher than anticipated customer acquisition costs, in marketing, and the one-time expense of the wellness program implementation. The first two are external factors. The third is an investment that will show to returns starting Q2 next year." Hamilton's expression soured. "So you're defending the wellness program?" Darius met his gaze directly. "I'm presenting the data. The program cost us $3 million this quarter. But turnover costs us approximately $4 million per quarter in recruitment, training, and lost productivity. If the program achieves its projected retention improvements, we'll be net positive by $8 million annually." Hamilton's jaw worked. "Those are projections, not guarantees." Darius felt something shift in his chest, a kind of recklessness that came from too many nights lying awake worrying about bills, about Maya's future, about whether playing it safe had ever actually kept anyone safe. "Every business decision is based on projections, Charles. If we only acted on guarantees, we'd never innovate, never grow, never take the calculated risks that built this company in the first place." The silence that followed felt dangerous. Department heads stared at their folders, suddenly fascinated by numbers they'd already memorized. Hamilton's face had gone red in a way that suggested someone had just committed a career-limiting move. But Victoria's expression had changed. Still controlled, still professional, but something in her eyes sparked with what might have been approval or surprise or both. Her voice cut through the tension. Darius is correct. We don't make decisions based on fear of risk. We make them based on informed analysis of potential returns. She turned to Hamilton and her tone took on an edge that could cut glass. Your concerns are noted, Charles, but unless the board has specific directives, I'll continue running this company according to the principles that took us from a startup to a billion-dollar valuation in 8 years. Hamilton stood abruptly. The board will have directives, Victoria. You can count on that. He left, taking his folder and his barely concealed hostility with him. The remaining department heads exchanged glances, the kind that telegraphed they just witnessed a declaration of war. Victoria dismissed them with a curt nod and they filed out with the speed of people eager to be anywhere else. Darius started to follow, but Victoria's voice stopped him. Mr. Washington, a moment. He turned back, laptop clutched against his chest like a shield. Victoria had moved to the window, staring out at the city spread below them like a circuit board. From this height, the people on the streets were invisible, reduced to the movement of cars and the shadows of buildings. And she didn't look at him when she spoke. Her words came quiet, almost reflective. That was either very brave or very stupid. Darius felt his heart hammering. Probably both. Now she turned and her expression had softened fractionally. Hamilton will remember that. He's not the forgiving type. Darius shrugged, aiming for a casualness he didn't feel. I said what needed saying. The numbers don't lie, and neither should we. Something flickered across her face, recognition maybe, or the acknowledgement of a kindred spirit. You stood up to me once before, 3 months ago during the budget review. You told me I was letting stress cloud my judgment. He remembered. It had been a closed-door meeting, just the two of them, and she'd been tearing apart his department's budget with a ferocity that felt personal. He'd pushed back, told her she was better than that fear was making her see enemies where there were only colleagues trying their best. She'd stared at him for a long moment, then dismissed him without another word. He'd assumed his career had stalled out at that exact second. His voice came careful. I probably overstepped. She shook her head, a small movement. You were right. I was better than that, and I am letting fear drive too many of my decisions lately. The admission surprised him. Victoria Bennett didn't do vulnerability, didn't show cracks in the armor she wore to every meeting, every presentation, every moment she spent in this building. But standing here in the morning light, she looked tired in a way that went deeper than lost sleep. Before he could respond, her professional mask slid back into place. Thank you for your support in there. I won't forget it. It was a dismissal, polite but final. Darius nodded, left the conference room, and tried to ignore the way his pulse hadn't quite settled back to normal. The rest of the day passed in the usual rhythm of meetings, emails, and the slow grind of financial management. Sarah appeared at his cubicle around 3 with gossip that Hamilton had been seen leaving the building in a fury, that the board had been making phone calls all afternoon, that something was brewing that would probably explode by Monday. Darius listened with half an ear, focused on finishing the monthly projections that were due by end of business. At 5:30, he packed up, took the elevator down to the garage, and drove back through rush hour traffic to pick up Maya from her after-school program. She bounced into the car full of stories about art class and how Tommy Anderson had eaten paste and had to go to the nurse, and Darius let her chatter fill the space while his mind kept circling back to Victoria's face in the conference room, to the way she'd looked when she said fear was driving her decisions. The evening routine unfolded with familiar comfort. Dinner, homework, bath time, the nightly battle over how many books counted as one more story. By 8:30, Maya was asleep. Mr. Hopscotch clutched to her chest, and Darius sat in the living room with a beer he didn't really want and a stack of medical bills he wanted even less. His mother's cancer treatment had been ongoing for 18 months, a brutal cycle of chemotherapy and radiation that was slowly winning the war but bankrupting them in the process. His parents' insurance covered most of it, but the co-pays and deductibles had accumulated into a mountain of debt that he chipped away at monthly $500 here, $1,000 there, never enough to make real progress. He shuffled through the latest batch oncologist hospital pharmacy and tried to decide which ones could wait another month. The knock came at exactly midnight, unexpected and jarring in the silence of the apartment. Darius's first thought was that something had happened. Maya's school, his mother, some emergency that required midnight notification. He set the bills aside, moved to the door, checked the peephole. Victoria Bennett stood in the hallway and she looked nothing like the woman who'd commanded that conference room this morning. Her hair was down loose around her shoulders, rain-soaked and clinging to her face. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, dark tracks against pale skin. Her blouse was plastered to her by the downpour that must have been happening outside, and her eyes held a devastation that made Darius's chest tighten in sympathetic pain. He opened the door, words catching in his throat. Victoria. Her voice came out raw, barely audible. I'm sorry to barge in like this, Darius. I didn't know where else to go. He stepped back, automatically creating space for her to enter his mind, racing through possibilities and finding none that made sense. Victoria Bennett showing up at his door at midnight, looking like her world had collapsed. It felt surreal, impossible, like stepping into someone else's life. From behind him, Maya's sleepy voice called out, Daddy, who's at the door? Victoria's eyes widened, reality crashing into whatever desperation had driven her here. You have a daughter. God, I didn't think I shouldn't have come here. But she was already inside, dripping on his worn carpet, and turning her away felt impossible. Darius grabbed a towel from the hallway closet, handed it to her, then turned to where Maya stood in the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hair a wild halo around her face. His voice came gentle. Maya, honey, go back to bed. I'll be there in a minute to tuck you in again. Maya's gaze fixed on Victoria with that perceptive intensity that children somehow possessed, reading the situation with an accuracy that made adults uncomfortable. She studied Victoria for a long moment, then nodded and padded back toward her bedroom, Mr. Hopscotch dragging behind her across the floor. Victoria pressed the towel to her face, shoulders shaking. I'm so sorry. This was completely inappropriate. I should go. Darius moved to the living room, gestured for her to follow. You're here now. Sit down. Tell me what happened. She sank onto his couch, worn secondhand. Nothing like the furniture that must fill her penthouse, and stared at her hands. The towel lay forgotten in her lap. When she spoke, her voice carried the hollow quality of someone who'd had their foundation kicked out from under them. The words came slowly, painfully. I caught my fiancé with my best friend tonight, at our engagement party. Darius felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. Jesus. Victoria laughed, but it was a broken sound. We were celebrating 7 years together, finally making it official. I'd spent weeks planning this party, making sure everything was perfect. And I walked into the guest bedroom to grab my phone charger and found them. She stopped, swallowed hard. They'd been sleeping together for 2 years. 2 years, Darius. Everyone knew. Everyone except me. The pain in her voice was visceral, the kind that made you hurt just hearing it. Darius sat beside her, maintaining careful distance, aware that whatever was happening here crossed 100 professional boundaries, but unable to care. His voice came quiet. That's brutal, I'm sorry. She wiped at her face with the towel, smearing mascara. I didn't even cry. Not there, not in front of everyone. I just walked out, got in my car, and started driving. I don't even remember deciding to come here. I just looked up, and I was parked outside your building. Darius tried to process that, tried to understand what would make Victoria Bennett untouchable, CEO, the woman who terrified board members, show up at his door in the middle of the night. They barely knew each other beyond professional interactions and that one heated exchange where he'd challenged her. Yet here she was, vulnerable and broken, sitting on a secondhand couch in an apartment that probably fit inside her penthouse bathroom. Victoria's gaze swept the room, taking in the scattered toys, the half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, the framed photo of Darius and Maya at her school's Cultural Heritage Day. Her expression softened fractionally. You have a beautiful daughter. Darius felt warmth spread through his chin. She's my whole world. Victoria's eyes settled on the photo. Darius in traditional African clothing his mother had sent Maya, in a dress celebrating her heritage. Both of them laughing at something just outside the frame. How long have you been doing this alone? The question felt personal, intimate, in a way that should have made him deflect. 3 years. Her mother left when Maya was 3. Decided family life wasn't what she'd signed up for. Victoria absorbed this, nodded slowly. And you've been managing this, she gestured around the apartment, while working 60-hour weeks at Bennett Industries. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the implicit praise. You do what you have to do. Maya deserves stability, and the job provides that. Her laugh came bitter. Stability. I've spent 15 years building that company, convincing myself that stability came from success, from power, from being untouchable. And tonight I realized I'm completely alone. My fiance was sleeping with my best friend. My board is looking for any excuse to push me out. I have a penthouse full of expensive furniture and no one to share it with. The raw honesty of it cut through Darius's defenses. He recognized that kind of loneliness, the particular isolation that came from being strong for so long that you forgot how to be anything else. He'd felt it in the months after Maya's mother left, when he'd had to be both parents, both protector and nurturer, with no room for his own grief. His words came before he could edit them. You showed up here for a reason. Victoria met his gaze and something electric passed between them. In the conference room today, you stood up to Hamilton. You defended the wellness program, defended me even though it probably hurt your career. I asked myself why you'd do that. Darius felt his pulse quicken. Because it was the right thing to do. Because the numbers supported it. Because she cut him off. Because you said I was better than letting fear drive my decisions. You said that 3 months ago and again today, and you were right both times. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Darius was intensely aware of the late hour of his daughter, sleeping down the hall of every professional boundary they were obliterating with this conversation. But he was also aware of the way Victoria was looking at him, not as her employee, not as a subordinate, but as someone who'd seen past the armor to the person underneath. Her voice dropped to something quieter, more vulnerable. Say that again, but look at me this time. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that had nothing to do with corporate policy or quarterly projections. Darius turned fully toward her, met her eyes gray. He noticed now in this light and felt something shift in his chest. His voice came steady despite the hammering of his heart. You're better than this, Victoria. You're letting fear drive your decisions. For a moment he thought she might lean forward, close the narrow distance that separated them on the couch. Her eyes held his, searching for something he wasn't sure he could name. Then she closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and the moment fractured. She stood abruptly. I should go. This was inappropriate. I'm your boss, and I'm a complete mess, and you have a daughter to think about. Darius stood too, felt the loss of whatever had almost happened. Victoria, she was already moving toward the door. Thank you for the towel. I'll see you Monday. We can pretend this never happened. But as her hand reached for the doorknob, Maya's voice stopped her cold. Are you my daddy's girlfriend? They both turned. Maya stood into the hall with Mr. Hopscotch dangling from one hand, her eyes wide with curiosity and sleepy confusion. She'd pulled on her favorite unicorn slippers, the ones that lit up when she walked, and her hair formed a halo of coils that desperately needed to be covered with her satin bonnet. Darius moved to his daughter's side, his mind racing. No, sweetie, this is Miss Bennett. She works with Daddy. Maya studied Victoria with that unnerving directness that only children possessed. You look sad. Victoria's professional mask cracked completely. She knelt down to Maya's level, and Darius saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I am a little sad. Maya considered this, then offered with the kind of wisdom that 6-year-olds sometimes stumbled into. When I'm sad, Daddy makes me hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows. It helps a lot. The tension in Victoria's shoulders softened. She glanced up at Darius, and something in her expression made his breath catch. That sounds like excellent medicine. Maya extended her small hand with the unconscious generosity of childhood. I can show you how he makes it. Darius found himself nodding before his brain could catalog all the reasons this was a terrible idea. He followed his daughter and his boss into his cramped kitchen, watched Maya climb onto her step stool to reach the cabinet where they kept the hot chocolate mix, and felt like he'd stepped sideways into an alternate reality. The next 20 minutes unfolded with a surreal domesticity. Maya directed the operation with the authority of a master chef, explaining to Victoria that the secret was heating the milk first, then adding the cocoa powder, and this was very important, exactly 7 mini marshmallows, no more, no less. Victoria listened with the same intensity she brought to board presentations, asking questions about ratios and temperatures that made Maya giggle. They settled at the small dining table, 3 mismatched mugs of hot chocolate steaming in the overhead light. Maya sat between them, swinging her legs and explaining her theory that unicorns could definitely swim, but probably preferred clouds. Victoria engaged with this thesis, seriously proposing that cloud swimming might require special hooves, which launched Maya into an elaborate explanation of unicorn biology that she was clearly inventing on the spot. Darius watched them, his CEO and his daughter, discussing the buoyancy properties of rainbow manes and felt something in his chest that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 3 years, a glimpse of what it might be like to share this life with someone else. Around 1:30, Maya's eyes started drooping, despite her valiant efforts to stay awake. Darius carried her back to bed, tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and returned to find Victoria washing the mugs at his sink. She turned when he entered. "I should have done that. You've already done so much." He moved beside her, took a dish towel from the drawer. "It's just hot chocolate." Her hands stilled in the soapy water. "It's more than that. You let a stranger into your home in the middle of the night. You let me meet your daughter. You didn't judge me for falling apart on your doorstep." Darius felt the weight of unspoken things pressing against his ribs. "You're not a stranger, and everyone's entitled to fall apart sometimes." She rinsed the last mug, handed it to him to dry. "I kept it together for so long. At work with Robert, with everyone. I convinced myself that strength meant never showing weakness, never admitting that I was drowning." He set the dried mug in the cabinet. "Strength isn't about never drowning. It's about knowing when to ask for help." Victoria leaned against the counter, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question felt like a test, like something that required careful consideration. But Darius was tired of weighing every word against potential consequences. So he answered with an honesty that felt dangerous. His voice came quiet. "Because 3 months ago you listened when I told you that you were better than your fear. You didn't fire me or write me up or make my life hell. You listened. And today when I pushed back against Hamilton, you backed me up. Maybe we both need someone who sees past the armor." She studied him in the dim kitchen light, and he was struck again by how different she looked from the CEO, who terrified board members, vulnerable human achingly alone despite everything she'd built. Her words came soft. "I've spent so many years being what everyone else needed me to be. The brilliant CEO, the perfect fiancé, the woman who had it all figured out. But I don't even know who I am without those roles." Darius understood that better than she probably realized. He'd been the responsible son, the devoted husband, the dedicated father, until the roles had stripped away everything else. Finding himself again had been a slow process, one he wasn't sure he'd completed. He took a risk. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe not knowing means you get to decide who you want to be instead of who you think you should be. Victoria's eyes met his, and something passed between them that felt like recognition. "When did you get so wise?" A laugh escaped him. "I'm a single father who makes hot chocolate at 1 in the morning with his boss. I don't think wisdom has anything to do with it." She smiled, then the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all night. "Your daughter is lucky to have you." The compliment settled warm in his chest. "I'm the lucky one. She's the best thing that ever happened to me, even on the hard days." Victoria moved toward the door, this time with less desperation and more genuine reluctance. "I really should go. It's late, and you have to get Maya to school in a few hours." Darius walked her to the door, hyper-aware of the small space of the way, her perfume, something subtle and expensive, mixed with the scent of rain and hot chocolate. "Will you be okay?" "Driving home, I mean." She nodded, and he noticed she'd wiped away most of the mascara, pulled her wet hair back into something resembling composure. "I'll be fine. Thank you for tonight, Darius, for listening, for the hot chocolate, for reminding me that there are still good people in the world." She left then, and Darius stood in the doorway, listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway, the elevator ding in the distance. When he finally closed the door, locked it, and returned to the living room, he felt like the last 2 hours had been a dream, vivid and strange and impossible to reconcile with reality. He cleaned up the remaining evidence of Victoria's visit, put away the hot chocolate mix, straightened the cushions on the couch where she'd sat. Then he returned to the stack of medical bills, trying to focus on numbers and payment schedules. But his mind kept circling back to gray eyes and a broken smile, and the way she'd looked at him when she said, "Say that again, but look at me this time." Sleep came eventually shallow and interrupted, full of dreams he couldn't quite remember when his alarm clock screamed at 5:47. Saturday passed in the familiar rhythm of single-parent weekend laundry, grocery shopping, Maya's soccer practice, the birthday party she'd been talking about all week. Jessica Chen's parents had rented a bounce house and hired a face painter, and Darius spent 3 hours making small talk with other parents while keeping half an eye on Maya as she bounced and shrieked with pure joy. He didn't think about Victoria, or he tried not to, but his mind kept drifting to the surreal image of her kneeling in his kitchen, listening with complete seriousness as Maya explained the properties of unicorn hooves. It felt disconnected from reality, from the Victoria Bennett who commanded boardrooms and made grown men nervous. Sunday brought church with his mother, who video called from her assisted living facility in Atlanta where his sister lived. The connection was terrible, freezing mid-sentence, and making his mother's voice stutter like a skipping record. But Maya chattered away about her week while Darius's mother smiled, with the kind of tired warmth that came from fighting battles that took everything you had. After Maya was asleep Sunday night, Darius sat with his laptop and tried to focus on the financial projections that were due Monday, but concentration felt impossible. His phone sat beside him silent, and he kept expecting it to buzz with a message from Victoria, something acknowledging Friday night, or maybe pretending it hadn't happened. But the screen stayed dark. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes after a storm. Darius dropped Maya at school, drove through traffic that seemed lighter than usual, and pulled into the underground garage at Bennett Industries with a knot of anxiety in his stomach. The weekend had given him time to think, to recognize that Friday night had been an aberration, a moment of crisis that would probably never be mentioned again. Victoria would return to being the untouchable CEO, he would return to being her financial manager, and they would both pretend that midnight visits and hot chocolate hadn't happened. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual. When the doors opened on the 15th floor, he immediately sensed something wrong. The usual Monday morning bustle had an edge to it, people clustered in tight groups, speaking in low voices, glancing toward the executive floor with expressions ranging from concern to poorly concealed excitement. Sarah materialized at his elbow before he'd taken 3 steps. "Darius, where have you been? Haven't you checked your email?" He pulled out his phone, swiped to his email app, and felt his stomach drop. 17 unread messages, most from colleagues, several from HR, one from Hamilton's assistant. The subject lines told a story he didn't want to read. Emergency board meeting. Organizational changes. Executive restructuring. His voice came out rougher than intended. What the hell happened? Sarah grabbed his arm, pulled him toward the relative privacy of a conference room. Victoria's ex-fiancé showed up this morning. Robert something. Made a scene in the lobby, yelling about how she'd used company resources to spy on him, threatening to sue. Security had to escort him out. Darius felt ice spread through his veins. Jesus. Sarah wasn't finished. Then the board called an emergency meeting. They've been in the executive conference room for over an hour. The rumor is they're using this as an excuse to force her out. Hamilton's been trying to get rid of her for months, and this gave him the ammunition he needed. The implications hit Darius like a physical blow. Victoria's personal crisis, the betrayal that had sent her to his door at midnight, was being weaponized by people who'd been looking for any excuse to undermine her authority. The wellness programs, the diversity initiatives, the progressive policies that had made Hamilton and the old guard uncomfortable, all of it was about to be dismantled because Victoria's fiancé was a vindictive asshole. His mind raced. Where is she now? Sarah's expression turned sympathetic. Still in the boardroom. Darius, you need to stay out of this. Whatever's happening up there, it's executive level. There's nothing you can do. But Darius was already moving toward the elevator, Sarah's protests fading behind him. He didn't have a plan, didn't know what he thought he could accomplish. But the image of Victoria sitting on his couch, broken and vulnerable and completely alone, drove him forward. The executive floor felt different on Monday mornings, the energy sharp and predatory. The assistant outside the boardroom, Angela, middle-aged and protective of her territory, stood as Darius approached. Her voice carried warning. "Mr. Washington, you can't go in there. The board is in session." He didn't slow down. "I need to speak with Miss Bennett. It's urgent." Angela moved to block him, but Darius was taller, faster, and desperate. He pushed past her, ignoring her shocked protest, and burst through the heavy wooden doors. 12 heads swiveled toward him. The board sat around the long table, Hamilton at the head, various executives and outside directors flanking him. Victoria stood at the far end, tablet in hand, her expression composed, but her eyes carrying a strain that made Darius's chest ache. She wore another perfect suit, hair pulled back severely every inch the professional CEO, but he could see the cracks if he looked for them, the tightness around her mouth, the barely perceptible tremor in her hand. Hamilton's voice cut like a blade. "Mr. Washington, this is a private meeting." Darius fought to keep his voice steady. "I need to speak with Miss Bennett. It's urgent." The silence that followed felt dangerous. Board members exchanged glances, the kind that suggested they were witnessing something that would have consequences. Hamilton's expression went from annoyed to calculating, probably already figuring out how to use this interruption to his advantage. Victoria stood smoothing her suit with precise movements. "Excuse me, gentlemen, 5 minutes." She walked past Darius, not looking at him, and stepped into the hallway. He followed, hyper-aware of Angela's scandalized expression and the weight of 12 board members' gazes on his back. The heavy doors closed with a definitive thud. Victoria's voice came low, urgent. "Darius, what are you doing? They were looking for any reason to question my judgment right now." He noticed details he'd missed in the boardroom. The exhaustion around her eyes, the way she held herself rigid, as if afraid that any relaxation would lead to collapse. She'd probably slept even less than he had this weekend, probably spent hours trying to figure out how to manage a crisis that kept metastasizing. His question came direct. "Is it true they're trying to force you out?" She sighed, rubbed her temples in a gesture that spoke of pain barely contained. "My personal life has become a liability. Robert is threatening to sue the company, claiming I used corporate resources to spy on him. It's complete bullshit, but the board is spooked." Darius felt anger rising hot and righteous. "That's ridiculous. You built this company from nothing." Victoria's laugh was bitter tired. "Welcome to corporate America, Darius. A woman can be brilliant, innovative, successful. But the moment her personal life becomes messy, she's a liability. Men get to have midlife crises and affairs and all manner of scandals, and boards call it character. Women get crucified for being human." The truth of it hit like a slap. He'd seen it before, the different standards, the way women in leadership had to be perfect, while men just had to be competent. But hearing it from Victoria, seeing her standing in this hallway fighting for a company she'd built, made it feel more visceral. He lowered his voice, aware that Angela was probably listening. "About Friday night." She cut him off, panic flashing across her face. "We can't talk about that here. I shouldn't have come to your home. It was unprofessional and unfair to you. I put you in an impossible position." Darius wanted to argue, to tell her that Friday night had meant something, that the connection he'd felt wasn't just his imagination. But the fear in her eyes stopped him. She was fighting for her professional life, and the last thing she needed was a subordinate complicating things with personal feelings. His voice came formal, careful. "I understand. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Something flickered in her expression, gratitude maybe, or regret. "I need to go back in there and salvage what's left of my career. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Washington, but I'll handle this." The use of his last name felt like a door closing. She turned, shoulders squared, and walked back into the boardroom without looking back. Darius stood in the hallway, feeling like he'd just been dismissed from something important without fully understanding what had happened. Angela glared at him as he walked past her desk. "That was extremely inappropriate, Mr. Washington." He didn't respond, just took the elevator back down to the 15th floor, where Sarah was waiting with an expression that mixed concern and exasperation. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What were you thinking, barging into a board meeting?" Darius slumped into his desk chair. "I wasn't thinking. She needed someone on her side." Sarah sat on the edge of his desk. "That's romantic and stupid in equal measure. She's your boss, Darius. Whatever you think you can do to help, you're more likely to make things worse." The words stung because they were probably true. But Darius couldn't shake the image of Victoria standing alone in that boardroom, facing down a board that had already decided her fate, and he hated feeling powerless to change it. The afternoon crawled by in a haze of forced productivity. Darius tried to focus on spreadsheets and projections, but his attention kept drifting to the executive floor, to whatever was happening behind those closed doors. Around 3, an email went out from HR, formal, carefully worded, designed to sound routine, while everyone who read it knew it was anything but. Victoria Bennett was being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending an investigation into allegations of misuse of corporate resources. Charles Hamilton would serve as acting CEO. The company thanked employees for their continued dedication during this transition period. The office erupted in barely contained speculation. People clustered around computer screens reading and rereading the email, as if different interpretations might emerge from the bland corporate language. Sarah appeared at Darius's cubicle, her expression grim. She didn't need to say anything. They both knew what this meant. Hamilton had won. The board had given him exactly what he wanted, using Robert's spurious accusations as justification to remove Victoria from power. The investigation would probably clear her eventually, but by then Hamilton would have cemented his control, undone her policies, and made it impossible for her to return. Another email arrived an hour later, this one from Hamilton himself. Darius scanned it quickly, then read it again, more slowly, his mind struggling to process the words. Due to organizational changes, Darius Washington was being promoted to interim chief financial officer effective immediately. The position came with a substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. Hamilton's assistant would be in touch to schedule a meeting to discuss the transition. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, read the email, and let out a low whistle. They're buying you off. The assessment was accurate and nauseating. Hamilton thought Darius knew something, probably assumed that Victoria's midnight visit had been to share damaging information or coordinate a defense. The promotion was a carrot, an incentive to keep quiet, to not make waves, to accept the new regime without protest. Darius's hands clenched into fists. I'm not for sale. Sarah's expression turned skeptical. You have a daughter and medical bills. That promotion probably doubles your salary. Can you afford to turn it down? The question haunted him through the rest of the afternoon, through the drive to pick up Maya, through dinner and homework and the evening routine. Could he afford to reject the promotion on principle? Maya's school tuition, his mother's cancer treatment, the stack of bills that never got smaller, they all demanded financial stability that his current salary barely provided. But accepting it meant betraying everything he'd told Victoria, meant becoming complicit in Hamilton's power play, meant looking Maya in the eye and explaining why Daddy chose money over integrity. After Maya was asleep, Darius sat in the living room with his phone staring at the screen like it might provide answers. Around 10, it buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief. Congratulations on the promotion. You'll make an excellent CFO, V. The words felt like an accusation and an absolution simultaneously. Did Victoria think he had orchestrated this somehow? That he'd used her vulnerability against her to advance his career? Or was she genuinely wishing him well, accepting that people had to make choices based on survival rather than principle? He typed a response, deleted it, tried again. This isn't what I wanted. 3 dots appeared, immediately disappeared, then reappeared. The pause stretched long enough that Darius wondered if she'd decided not to respond. Then her message came through. Victoria's words were measured, final. We don't always get what we want. Take care of yourself and Maya. Darius stared at the message, feeling something important slipping through his fingers like water. He started typing again, trying to find words that could bridge the distance that had opened between them, but another message arrived before he could send. This one was softer, more vulnerable. For what it's worth, Friday night was the first time I felt real in years. Thank you for that. His chest tightened. He wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to tell her that Friday night had meant something to him too, that he wasn't sure what was happening between them, but he wanted to find out. But the late hour, the professional boundaries, the weight of impossible circumstances, they all pressed down, making action feel impossible. He settled for honesty. It meant something to me too, more than you probably know. No response came. The screen stayed dark, the conversation ending on a note that felt unfinished. Darius set his phone down, leaned back on the couch, and tried to figure out how he'd gotten here. Promoted to a position he didn't want, connected to a woman he barely knew, but couldn't stop thinking about, facing choices that all seemed designed to hurt someone he cared about. The weekend loomed ahead, empty and uncertain. Maya would keep him busy with her usual demands and delights, but underneath it all would be the question that had no good answer. What was he going to do come Monday morning? Outside rain started falling again, the same storm that had brought Victoria to his door, now returning with its own kind of prophecy. Darius listened to it hammer against the windows and wondered if some storms ever really ended, or if they just kept circling back, wearing you down, until you stopped trying to stay dry. Monday morning stretched into an interminable week that felt like walking through quicksand. Darius accepted the interim CFO position because refusing would have raised questions he couldn't answer, but the new office on the executive floor felt like a prison cell decorated in mahogany and glass. Hamilton had moved quickly, installing his own people in key positions, scheduling meetings that excluded anyone who'd been loyal to Victoria, reshaping the company's direction with surgical precision. The wellness program was suspended pending budget review. The diversity hiring initiative was quietly shelved. The expanded parental leave policy was rolled back to industry standard, which meant barely adequate. Each change came wrapped in language about fiscal responsibility and shareholder value. But Darius recognized them for what they were: systematic dismantling of everything Victoria had built. He attended executive meetings where Hamilton spoke about the company's future with the confidence of someone who'd already won. The other executives nodded along, either believing the narrative or too afraid to challenge it. Darius kept his mouth shut and took notes, documenting everything with a meticulousness that would have made his accounting professors proud. Sarah brought him coffee on Wednesday morning, setting it on his new desk with a look that combined congratulations and concern. The office was triple the size of his old cubicle, with windows overlooking the city and furniture that probably cost more than his car. Her voice carried warning underneath the casual tone. "You look miserable for someone who just got their dream promotion." Darius stared at the spreadsheet on his monitor, numbers that represented people's livelihoods reduced to data points. "This isn't my dream, it's Hamilton's." She settled into the chair across from him, lowered her voice. "People are talking, wondering why you got promoted right after Victoria got suspended. Some think you sold her out." The accusation landed like a punch, even though Sarah was just reporting office gossip. "I didn't do anything to her." Sarah's expression suggested she believed him, but knew belief didn't matter in the court of corporate opinion. "Doesn't matter what's true, matters what people think is true. And right now the optics are terrible." Maya noticed the change too in the way children noticed everything adults tried to hide. Thursday night, while Darius helped her practice spelling words, she looked up from her worksheet with eyes too perceptive for 6 years old. Her question came innocent, devastating. "Daddy, why don't you smile anymore?" He forced brightness into his expression. "I smile all the time, baby girl." She shook her head, completely unconvinced. "Not your real smile. Your pretend smile, the one you use when Grandma asks if you're eating enough vegetables." The observation was accurate enough to hurt. Darius set down the pencil, pulled Maya onto his lap. "Work's just been stressful lately, but that's not your problem to worry about." Maya played with the buttons on his shirt, a habit from when she was younger. "Is it because the mean lady boss went away?" He corrected automatically. "She's not mean, sweetie, and she didn't go away. She's just taking some time off." Maya absorbed this with the logic that defined childhood. "But you liked her, I could tell. You used your soft voice, the one you only use with me and Grandma." Darius felt exposed by his daughter's insight. Had it been that obvious? Had everyone at the office noticed the way he'd defended Victoria, the way he'd looked at her, the edge of something more than professional respect? Friday afternoon brought Hamilton's summons. The message came through his assistant, not a request, but a command delivered with the kind of corporate politeness that couldn't disguise the power dynamic. Darius took the elevator to Hamilton's office, knocked on the doorframe, and entered a space that screamed old money and older attitudes. Hamilton sat behind a desk that looked like it belonged in a museum, expensive scotch already poured into a crystal glass despite the hour barely being past 3. He didn't offer Darius a drink, which felt deliberate, a subtle reminder of hierarchy, even in this moment of supposed mentorship. Hamilton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Darius, my boy, sit down. Let's talk about your future." The endearment grated. Darius had never been Hamilton's boy, would never be, but he settled into the leather chair and tried to look receptive rather than revolted. Hamilton took a long sip of scotch, savored it with the appreciation of someone who'd never had to choose between quality alcohol and groceries. You've been doing excellent work. The board is impressed. Your financial analysis, your leadership potential, your understanding of what this company needs to succeed. Darius waited for the other shoe to drop. Men like Hamilton didn't offer compliments without expecting something in return. The older man leaned forward, voice dropping to something conspiratorial. We've decided to make your position permanent. Substantial raise, full benefits, stock options. You'll be set for life, Darius. Your daughter will have every opportunity. Your mother will have the best care money can buy. The mention of his family felt like a threat wrapped in concern. Darius kept his expression neutral. That's generous. What do I need to do? Hamilton slid a document across the polished desk. Darius picked it up, scanned the first paragraph, felt his blood turn to ice. It was a statement written in careful legalese claiming that he had personally witnessed Victoria Bennett misusing company resources for personal matters, specifically using corporate accounts to hire private investigators to spy on her fiancé. Every word was a lie. Darius had never witnessed anything remotely like that. But the statement was exactly the evidence the board needed to fire Victoria with cause, to deny her severance, to destroy her reputation so thoroughly that she'd never work in this industry again. His voice came out carefully controlled. This isn't true. Hamilton's expression didn't change. Truth is relative in business, Darius. Victoria made enemies, powerful ones. She refused to play the game, refused to understand that running a company requires compromise. The board has wanted her gone for months. Darius set the paper down like it might contaminate him. So this was never about her ex-fiancé's accusations. That was just convenient timing. Hamilton's smile turned predatory. Robert's threats provided an opening, yes. But make no mistake, Victoria Bennett's progressive agenda was bad for business. She prioritized feelings over profits, diversity over qualifications, employee satisfaction over shareholder returns. That's not sustainable. The casual dismissal of everything Victoria had achieved made Darius's jaw clench. He thought about the wellness program that had reduced turnover by 23%, the diversity initiatives that had brought in some of their most innovative talent, the parental leave policy that had made Bennett Industries an employer people wanted to work for. All of it reduced to bleeding heart liberalism by a man who measured success exclusively in quarterly earnings. Darius stood up. I won't sign this. Hamilton's expression hardened, the friendly mentor vanishing to reveal the predator underneath. Think about your daughter, Darius. Single father, aging mother with medical issues. You need this job. You need this salary. Without it, what happens to Maya's education? To your mother's treatment? The threat hung explicit in the air. Sign or lose everything. Betray Victoria or watch his family suffer. The choice was designed to be impossible, to force him into complicity through the weight of obligations he couldn't escape. Hamilton's voice turned almost sympathetic. I'll give you the weekend to reconsider. Monday morning, I expect your signature or your resignation. Choose wisely. Darius walked out of the office in a daze, took the elevator down to the garage, sat in his car for 20 minutes trying to breathe. The document felt like it was burning a hole in his briefcase. He thought about Maya's smile, his mother's chemotherapy bills, the apartment lease that was due for renewal next month. He thought about Victoria sitting on his couch, broken and vulnerable, trusting him with her pain. The weekend was torture. Saturday morning, Maya had a soccer game that Darius watched without really seeing. Other parents cheered and shouted encouragement, while he stood on the sidelines calculating how long his savings would last if he quit, whether he could find another job before the money ran out, what he would tell Maya when they had to move to a worse neighborhood with worse schools. Sunday afternoon brought a call from his sister in Atlanta. Their mother had taken a turn. Nothing critical, but the doctors wanted to adjust her treatment plan, which meant more tests, more appointments, more bills. His sister's voice carried exhaustion that mirrored his own, the weariness of adult children watching a parent fight a battle that took everything and promised nothing. After he hung up, Darius sat in Maya's room watching her sleep. Mersh hopscotch clutched to her chest, completely unaware of the impossible choices her father was facing. He thought about the life he wanted to give her: good schools, safe neighborhoods, opportunities he'd never had. The CFO position could provide all of that. All he had to do was lie, betray someone who trusted him, become the kind of man who valued comfort over conscience. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, words she'd spoken when he was young, and thought the world was simpler. Our name means something, Darius. It's all we really own. Don't sell it cheap. By Sunday night, he'd made his decision. It felt less like choice and more like surrender to something fundamental about who he was, who he needed to be to look Maya in the eye every morning. He drove to Victoria's building, the address pulled from the company directory before he'd left Friday evening. The doorman recognized him from Friday night, let him up with less resistance this time. The elevator ride felt endless, each floor marked by ascending numbers and descending certainty about what he was doing. Victoria answered the door in jeans and a sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable than the power suits ever did. Her expression registered surprise, then something that might have been hope or fear, or both. She stepped back, creating space for him to enter. Darius, this is unexpected. The penthouse was exactly what he'd imagined: floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than his annual salary, art on the walls that looked like it belonged in museums. But it felt empty, sterile, a showroom rather than a home. No photos, no personal touches, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. His words came out rushed. They want me to lie about you. Hamilton offered me the permanent CFO position if I sign a statement saying you misuse company resources. Victoria's face went very still. And you came here to tell me you're taking the deal. The assumption stung. What? No. I came to warn you. They're setting you up, Victoria. Hamilton admitted the board's been planning this for months. Your ex's accusations just gave them the excuse they needed. She moved to the windows, stared out at the city lights that turned the night into a constellation of human ambition. I know, I've always known they wanted me gone. Darius followed her, confused. Then why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you build alliances, play politics, do what you needed to do to protect yourself? Her laugh was soft, bitter. Because fighting dirty means becoming what they are. I built that company on principles, Darius. The moment I compromise those to keep power, I've already lost everything that matters. He wanted to argue, to tell her that principles didn't pay bills or fight board coups, but something in her expression stopped him. She looked tired, but not defeated, resigned, but not broken. Her eyes found his. So you're just giving up, letting them win. Victoria turned to face him fully. I'm choosing my battles, and right now my battle is figuring out who I am outside of that company. I spent 15 years defining myself by that CEO title. Maybe losing it is the best thing that could happen. The rationalization felt like something she'd convinced herself to believe rather than actual conviction. Darius recognized it because he'd done the same thing when Maya's mother left, told himself it was for the best, that they were better off without someone who didn't want to stay. When the truth was, he'd felt abandoned and terrified and completely unprepared. His voice came quieter. Why am I really here, Victoria? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She studied him, gray eyes searching his face for something she couldn't quite name. The distance between them felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Her words came slow, careful. I don't know. I just know that what they're doing is wrong, and I can't be part of it. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, could see the gold flecks in her gray eyes. Even if it costs you everything. Darius thought about Maya, about his mother, about the bills and the obligations and all the practical reasons to walk away. Then he thought about looking at himself in the mirror every morning, about the example he was setting for his daughter, about what kind of man he wanted to be. His answer came from somewhere deeper than calculation. Some things are worth more than a paycheck, like being able to tell Maya I did the right thing, like being able to look at myself and not see a coward. My mother always told me our name means something. I won't dishonor it. Victoria's expression softened, something vulnerable breaking through the careful control. You're a good man, Darius Washington. Better than most. The compliment made him uncomfortable. I'm just trying to figure this out. I have Maya, my mother's bills, but I also have to live with myself. What will you do? She reached out, took his hand, the touch electric, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with human connection. Whatever you decide, I want you to know something. That night at your apartment, it meant more to me than I expected it to. His heart hammered against his ribs. It meant something to me too. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Say that again. But look at me this time. The echo of that first night resonated between them. Darius met her eyes, let her see the truth he'd been trying to deny for 2 weeks. It meant something to me, Victoria. You mean something to me. She closed the distance between them, and this time there was no hesitation. Her lips found his in a kiss that felt like surrender and declaration, simultaneously, like falling and flying, like every dangerous thing he'd been trying to avoid since the moment she'd knocked on his door at midnight. When they finally broke apart, foreheads touching, breathing ragged reality crashed back in with all its complications. Victoria's smile was tremulous. I've been thinking about doing that since I left your apartment. Darius laughed softly. Me too. Her expression turned serious. This complicates things. He pulled back slightly enough to see her face. My life's already complicated. What's one more complication? They talked through the night sitting on her expensive couch that was somehow less comfortable than his second-hand one, sharing pieces of themselves that had nothing to do with corporate structure or quarterly earnings. Victoria told him about building the company from nothing, about the investors who'd dismissed her, the competitors who'd underestimated her, the slow climb from startup to industry leader. She described the satisfaction of proving everyone wrong, but also the loneliness of being at the top with no one to share the view. Darius shared his own story meeting Maya's mother in college, the pregnancy that had derailed both their plans, the marriage that had lasted 3 years before she'd decided motherhood wasn't what she'd signed up for. He described those first months alone with a 3-year-old, learning to be both parents, making mistakes and figuring it out, and loving Maya with a fierceness that sometimes scared him. Around 4 in the morning, Victoria fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. Darius stayed awake, watching the city lights fade as dawn approached, thinking about choices and consequences and the terrifying freedom that came with burning bridges. By the time Victoria woke, sunlight streaming through the windows, Darius had made his plan. Monday morning, he walked into Hamilton's office with his head high and his hand steady. The older man looked up from his desk, that predatory smile already forming. Hamilton's voice carried satisfaction. Ah, Darius, I trust you've come to a sensible decision. Darius placed a folder on the desk. I have. Hamilton opened it eagerly, then frowned. The documents inside weren't the signed statement. They were something else entirely, a resignation letter, effective immediately, and a detailed business plan for an independent financial consulting firm. Hamilton's face reddened. What is this? Darius kept his voice level. I'm resigning. I'm starting my own company. I don't want a war, Hamilton. I just want to leave cleanly and build something I can be proud of. The older man stood abruptly. You're making a grave mistake, Washington. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. Darius slid another document across the desk, a transcript of their Friday conversation, time-stamped and verified. I don't think so. Hamilton's face went from red to pale. You recorded me? That's illegal. California is a 2-party consent state. A smile touched Darius's lips. Actually, your office disclosure policy written by Victoria ironically states that all conversations in executive offices may be recorded for security purposes. It's posted on the wall behind you. You consented the moment I walked in. The blood drained completely from Hamilton's face as he turned to see the small plaque he'd probably never actually read. Darius watched the realization hit, watched the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. Hamilton's voice came out strangled. You're bluffing. You wouldn't release that. Darius shrugged. Am I care to test that theory with the board, with the press, with the SEC, given that some of what you admitted constitutes potential securities fraud? They stared at each other across the expensive desk, predator and prey reversing roles. Finally, Hamilton sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. His words came out defeated. What do you want? Darius felt something settle in his chest, a kind of peace that came from standing on solid ground. I already told you. Clean exit, standard severance package, neutral reference. That's all. Hamilton's nod was stiff. Fine. Get out. Darius turned to leave, but Hamilton's voice stopped him at the door. She'll break your heart, you know. Victoria Bennett doesn't know how to love anything except power. The assessment was meant to wound, but Darius recognized it for what it was. The bitter observation of a man who'd spent his life accumulating power and ended up alone. His response came quiet. Maybe. but I'd rather take that chance than spend another day working for someone who doesn't know the difference between power and strength. He walked out of Hamilton's office for the last time, took the elevator down to the 15th floor, and started boxing up his desk. Sarah appeared with coffee and an expression that mixed pride and concern. Her voice carried admiration. "You actually did it. You quit." Darius taped up a box of personal items. "I quit, or got fired. The line's pretty blurry." She helped him pack, asked questions about his plans, offered to help however she could. Other colleagues stopped by, some wishing him well, others maintaining careful distance from someone who just committed career suicide. By noon, his office was empty and his corporate email was deactivated. Walking out of Bennett Industries for the last time felt like shedding skin, painful, necessary, liberating. The afternoon stretched ahead with terrifying possibility. No job, limited savings, and a business plan that was more hope than strategy. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "I heard. Are you okay?" He typed back, define okay, unemployed but employed, terrified but certain, free but trapped by consequences. Her response came quickly. "Come over tonight after Maya's asleep. We should talk about next steps." Darius agreed, then drove to pick up his daughter from school. Maya bounced into the car full of stories about art class and recess, completely unaware that her father had just upended their entire financial future. He listened to her chatter and wondered how long it would be before she noticed the changes, before the consequences of his choices started affecting her life. That evening, after Maya was tucked in and his mother had been updated via a phone call that soft-pedaled the drama, Darius drove back to Victoria's penthouse. She answered the door quickly, pulled him inside, and the kiss that followed felt different from last night, more desperate, more real, weighted with the knowledge that they'd both just jumped off cliffs without knowing if they'd fly or fall. Victoria pulled back first, her hand still resting on his chest, where she could probably feel his heart racing. The penthouse felt different now, less sterile showroom, more possibility. She led him to the couch, settled beside him with their knees touching, and the conversation that followed felt like drawing blueprints for a future neither of them could fully visualize. Her voice carried determination threaded with uncertainty. "I've been thinking about starting my own consulting firm, helping women-led startups navigate funding, break through the glass ceiling. Everything I learned building Bennett Industries, but on my terms." Darius absorbed this, recognized the spark in her eyes that probably mirrored his own. "I want to build a financial consulting practice. Small businesses, entrepreneurs who can't afford the big firms. People like me who are just trying to make it work." They talked through logistics, office space, initial clients, startup costs. Victoria had savings, investments, connections. Darius had expertise, determination, and approximately 6 months of expenses covered if he lived lean. The gap between their resources should have felt insurmountable, but somehow it didn't. Around 2 in the morning, Victoria made an offer that felt like a test. "I want to invest in your firm, not charity, Darius. An actual investment. I know talent when I see it." Pride warred with practicality in his chest. "I can't let you bail me out." Her expression turned sharp. "I'm not bailing you out. I'm making a smart business decision. Your financial analysis is better than anyone I've worked with. You understand small business economics in ways MBA graduates never will because you've lived it. That's valuable." The argument continued until dawn, both of them too stubborn to concede easily. Finally, they compromised. Victoria would invest seed capital in exchange for minority equity, enough to get him started, but not enough to make him feel bought. The terms were favorable, but not charitable, professional, but with an undercurrent of something more personal. Darius left as the sun rose, exhausted and exhilarated, with a handshake agreement that felt like the beginning of everything. The first month was chaos. Darius converted Maya's playroom into a makeshift office, laptop balanced on a folding table, client calls scheduled around school pickup and bedtime. His first client was a woman who owned a small bakery, cash flow problems, threatening to close her doors. He spent 3 nights analyzing her books, restructuring her payment schedules, negotiating with suppliers. When she called 2 weeks later to say the changes had saved her business, Darius felt something he hadn't experienced at Bennett Industries. Direct impact, immediate meaning. Victoria launched her consulting firm with characteristic intensity. Her first client was a tech startup founded by 2 women who'd been laughed out of venture capital meetings. Victoria walked them through pitch refinement, financial projections, investor psychology. Within 6 weeks, they'd secured Series A funding. But success wasn't linear. Month 3 brought crisis that felt designed to break them both. Darius's biggest potential client, a small manufacturing company that would have provided steady revenue for a year, backed out after a background check revealed he'd left Bennett Industries under unclear circumstances. The Whisper network that Hamilton controlled made sure everyone knew Darius Washington was unreliable, possibly unethical, definitely a risk. 3 other prospects vanished the same week. Victoria faced her own reckoning as an reckoning when a prominent women's business organization rescinded a speaking invitation after board members raised concerns about the scandal at Bennett Industries. Robert's lawsuit, eventually dismissed but heavily publicized, had tainted her reputation. Potential clients worried about association, about what it meant to hire a consultant whose personal life had imploded so spectacularly. The evening, everything came apart. Darius sat at his folding table, surrounded by unpaid invoices and dwindling bank balance, calculating how many more weeks he could survive before crawling back to corporate employment. His phone rang. Victoria, her voice tight with frustration. She didn't bother with greeting. "I just lost the Henderson account. They said my scandal makes me a liability to their brand." Darius closed his eyes, felt defeat settling into his bones. Johnson Manufacturing pulled out this morning. Hamilton's been making calls. The silence on the line felt heavy with shared despair. 3 months in, and they were both failing in ways that felt inevitable. Victoria's voice came smaller than he'd ever heard it. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I'm not cut out for starting over. The admission terrified him because if Victoria, brilliant, relentless, Victoria was ready to quit, what chance did he have? But then Maya appeared in the doorway, pajamas on backwards, Mr. Hopscotch dragging on the floor. Her sleepy voice cut through his spiral. "Daddy, why are you sad talking?" He muted the phone. "Just work stuff, baby. Go back to bed." Maya crossed to him instead, climbed into his lap with the confidence of someone who knew she'd always be welcome. "You told me when things are hard, that's when we work harder. Remember, when I wanted to quit soccer because I wasn't good at it." The memory surfaced. Maya in tears after a game where she'd missed every shot, wanting to give up. He'd told her that hard things were worth doing, that failure was just practicing for success, that Washingtons didn't quit when things got difficult. His daughter's logic was damning. "So why are you quitting?" Darius unmuted the phone. "Victoria, you still there?" Her voice came uncertain. "Yeah." He looked at Maya, at her complete faith that her father would figure it out. "We're not quitting, we just need a different strategy." The shift happened gradually, then all at once. Instead of chasing big clients who worried about reputation, Darius focused on businesses too small for anyone else to care about: immigrant-owned shops, single-parent entrepreneurs, people trying to build something from nothing. They couldn't pay much, but they paid what they could, and word of mouth in those communities spread faster than Hamilton's Whisper network. Victoria pivoted to startups too early for traditional consulting founders who were building in garages and spare bedrooms. She traded equity for fees, betting on potential rather than immediate profit. Some would fail, but the ones that succeeded would make the gamble worthwhile. They worked insane hours, Darius coding financial models after Maya went to sleep, Victoria taking calls at midnight with founders in different time zones. Their businesses grew slowly, painfully, nothing like the hockey stick growth investors wanted to see, but sustainable in ways that mattered more. 6 months in, they were still struggling, but no longer drowning. The relationship developed in stolen moments: coffee while Maya was at school, late-night phone calls after she fell asleep, weekends, when Victoria would come over and they'd pretend to work while mostly just enjoying proximity. Maya's acceptance of Victoria happened gradually. The first time Victoria joined them for dinner, Maya watched her with suspicion, protective of their little family unit. But Victoria didn't try to be her mother or replace anyone. She just showed up, asked questions about unicorns and soccer, and listened like Maya's answers mattered. The breakthrough came on a Saturday morning when Darius had an emergency client call. Victoria offered to take Maya to the park, and he agreed with trepidation. They returned 3 hours later, both covered in mud from some adventure involving a creek and a frog Maya had named Princess Ribbits. Victoria's designer clothes were ruined, and she was laughing in a way Darius had never heard: pure, unself-conscious joy. Maya announced at dinner that night, "Victoria's okay. She knows how to catch frogs. Apparently, that was the standard by which 6-year-olds measured worth. But integration wasn't smooth. 8 months in, they had their first real fight, not about work or money, but about parenting. Victoria had taken Maya shopping and bought her an expensive tablet for educational games. Darius saw it as overstepping, as trying to buy affection, as not understanding that Maya didn't need expensive gifts, but just needed people who showed up. The argument exploded in Victoria's penthouse, both of them yelling over each other until the words turned sharp enough to draw blood. Darius's voice rose with frustration. "You can't just throw money at her. That's not how this works." Victoria's eyes flashed. "I wasn't throwing money. I was trying to help. I was trying to be part of this." The real issue underneath surfaced Darius's fear that Victoria would eventually leave, like Maya's mother had. That commitment was easy when things were new and hard when reality set in. Victoria's fear that she'd never be good enough, that she didn't know how to be part of a family, that her default setting was CEO rather than partner. They stood on opposite sides of her living room, breathing hard, until Victoria's voice broke on something that sounded like tears. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need." Darius felt his anger dissolve into something more complicated. "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to talk to me before making decisions about my daughter. I need you to understand that we're a package deal, me and Maya. You don't get one without the other." She wiped at her eyes. "I know that. I want that. I just keep screwing it up because I've spent so long making executive decisions that I forget family isn't a boardroom." They talked through the night again, this time about boundaries and communication and what it meant to build a life together when neither of them had templates that worked. By morning, they'd established ground rules. Big decisions about Maya required discussion. Gifts needed approval. Victoria could have opinions, but Darius had final say on parenting. The framework wasn't perfect, but it was foundation. One year after Victoria had knocked on his door at midnight, Darius asked her to move in. Not to the apartment, too small, too much his space rather than theirs, but to a townhouse they could afford together. It had a backyard for Maya, an office for each of them, and a kitchen big enough that they wouldn't trip over each other making breakfast. Victoria's response wasn't immediate acceptance. She sat with the question, visibly working through implications. "Are you sure your life is already full? Maya, your mother, the business." Darius took her hands. "That's exactly why I'm sure. My life is full, but it's more complete with you in it. You make us better." She looked at him with those gray eyes that had first caught out his attention in a conference room a lifetime ago. "I love you, Darius Washington. You and Maya both." The declaration should have felt momentous, but instead it felt natural, like acknowledging something that had been true for months. "Say that again, but look at me." She smiled through tears. "I love you, both of you, more than I ever thought possible." They moved in together on a Sunday in spring, Maya directing furniture placement with the authority of someone who'd watched too many home improvement shows. The first night in the new house, they ordered pizza and sat on the floor because the couch hadn't arrived yet, and it felt perfect in its imperfection. 20 months after that first midnight knock, Victoria and Darius stood in front of a judge in a simple civil ceremony. Maya served as flower girl and self-appointed wedding planner, her natural hair styled in cornrows with beads that clicked when she walked. Victoria was 5 months pregnant, the slight swell visible under her simple white dress. The ceremony was small. Darius's mother via video call from Atlanta, his sister and her family Sarah, and a few friends from the early struggling days of their businesses. No one from Bennett Industries, no corporate networking, just people who'd shown up when showing up mattered. When the judge pronounced them married, Maya cheered louder than anyone else. The reception was in the backyard of their townhouse catered by the bakery owner who'd been Darius's first client. String lights hung between trees. Music played from a speaker balanced on the porch railing. It was modest and perfect, and theirs. During their first dance, Victoria whispered against his ear, "You saved me." Darius pulled back enough to see her face to make sure she understood. "No, we saved each other." Later, after most guests had left, Maya stood on a chair to make an announcement. At 8 years old, she'd grown into her perceptiveness, could read emotions the way other kids read picture books. Her voice carried clear across the yard. "I want to say something about Victoria." The remaining guests quieted. Darius felt Victoria tense beside him, probably worried about what unpredictable thing his daughter might say. But Maya's expression was serious, thoughtful. She looked directly at Victoria. When you first came to our apartment, I thought you were just another person who would leave. People leave a lot. My mom left. Daddy's friends left when things got hard. But you didn't leave. You stayed even when Daddy lost his job. You stayed when your business was hard. You stayed when I was mean about the tablet. Victoria's eyes were wet now, reflecting the string lights. Maya continued, Daddy says family is people who stay. So you're family now, not just because you married Daddy or because of the baby, because you stayed. The simplicity of it landed like thunder. Victoria crossed to Maya, pulled her into a hug that spoke of promises wordlessly made and kept. Darius watched them, his daughter and his wife, and felt something settle that he hadn't realized was unsettled. The businesses continued to grow. Victoria's consulting firm expanded to 5 employees, Darius's practice to 3. They weren't wealthy, probably never would be by Bennett Industries standards, but they were stable, successful in ways that mattered beyond bank balances. Bennett Industries itself had imploded spectacularly 18 months after Victoria left. Hamilton's aggressive cost-cutting had tanked morale, key clients had departed, and the board had eventually forced him out too. The company sold to a competitor at a fraction of its peak valuation. Victoria read the news with something that wasn't quite satisfaction, more like vindication mixed with sadness for what could have been. 2.5 years after that midnight knock, Darius's phone rang while he was reviewing contracts. Unknown number, which usually meant spam or a potential client. He answered anyway. The voice was familiar despite years of silence. Mr. Washington, this is Jennifer Torres from Bennett Industries, or what's left of it. Jennifer had run marketing, had been one of the few executives to quietly support Victoria. Darius remembered her defending the wellness program in that final meeting. Jennifer, what can I do for you? Her tone carried irony. The board wants to offer Victoria her CEO position back. New ownership, clean slate, commitment to her original vision. They're serious about making things right. The offer should have felt like vindication, like justice finally arriving late, but arriving nonetheless. Darius thanked her for the call, said he'd pass along the message, and hung up feeling something complicated. That night, after Maya was asleep and their son Marcus, 3 months old, was finally down after a marathon feeding session, Darius told Victoria about the call. She absorbed it without visible reaction, then moved to the window overlooking their modest backyard. The view was nothing like her old penthouse, but something in her posture suggested she preferred this one. Her response came quiet. What do you think I should do? He joined her at the window. What do you want to do? Victoria was silent for a long moment, then turned to face him with a smile that held zero hesitation. I want to stay exactly where I am. I have a company I built from nothing, a family I love, a life that's mine, rather than one I'm performing for shareholders. Why would I trade that for an office that never really wanted me? The certainty in her voice matched what Darius felt about his own choices. They'd built something together, not just businesses, but a life that didn't require compromise or performance, that allowed them to be fully themselves. He pulled her close. Then tell them thanks, but no thanks. She laughed against his chest. You know what the best part is? 3 years ago, that offer would have felt like everything I wanted. Now it just feels like everything I already left behind. Later, when Victoria had returned Jennifer's call and politely declined, she found Darius in Marcus's nursery, watching their son sleep with an expression that still caught her off guard, sometimes pure, uncomplicated love. She stood beside him, their shoulders touching. Do you ever regret it? Walking away from the CFO position, the security, the easy path. Darius considered the question honestly. The years had been hard, money-tight success, uncertain every month, a balance between bills and dreams. But he thought about Maya's trust, Marcus's arrival, Victoria's hand in his, the clients whose businesses he'd helped save the life they'd built from wreckage and determination. His answer came from the same place that had driven him to quit in the first place. Not even once. Some paths are easy. Some are right. They're not always the same. Victoria kissed him softly. Say that again. He smiled at the callback to that first night, to all the times since when those words had marked important moments. Some paths are easy. Some are right. They're not always the same. She rested her head on his shoulder. both of them watching Marcus's tiny chest rise and fall. We did okay, didn't we? For two people who had no idea what we were doing. Darius thought about midnight knocks and impossible choices and the courage it took to build something new from ruins. We did better than okay. We did real. Outside rain started falling, not the storm that had brought Victoria to his door, but something gentler, the kind that nourished rather than destroyed. They stood together in the nursery, two people who had lost everything, and found each other watching their son sleep and listening to rain tap patterns of promise against the window. Sometimes the most powerful words in the world weren't grand declarations or sweeping promises. Sometimes they were simple truths repeated until they became foundation. We stayed. We built this. We're home. The journey that began with a knock at midnight had led them here not to perfection, but to something better. A life built on choices made consciously rather than defaulted to on love, chosen daily rather than assumed on the radical act of staying when staying was hard. And every night before sleep claimed them, Darius would whisper the same question Victoria had asked that first time. Say it again. And she would answer always, I love you, I choose you, every day I choose this. Some stories ended with triumph or tragedy, victory or defeat. Theirs ended with something quieter but no less profound, two people standing in a nursery they'd painted themselves in a house they'd chosen together, watching rain fall on a garden they were learning to tend. Not perfect, not easy, but absolutely undeniably real.